We're live.
Okay, this is the Senate Education Committee on the afternoon of April 3rd. We're going to start with a lot of things going, a number of topics today. We're going to start though, just stepping back a little bit and looking at literacy programs in Vermont schools, where we are, why we might have had some slippage over the last several years and what we're going to correct it. But before we start, I know you know Senator Ron Hinsdale, and Senator Sheen may be coming in the middle seat there, but next to him,
Dave Waits, representing Rutland County.
Seth Wongratz from the Bennington Senate District.
Terry Williams, also from Rutland.
Steve Heffernan, Addison County.
So that, for the record, you are.
For the record, I'm Lori Quinn, and I serve as president of Stern Center for Language and Learning. We're based in Williston.
Okay, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Happy to be with you this afternoon and appreciate the chance to think with you a little bit about the importance of reading in particular. Dear to our hearts at the Stern Center, though we cover other academic and social emotional areas as well. We've really been a reading focused organization in the nonprofit sector for a long time. Deep roots here in Vermont, 43 years of helping kids and families, and several decades now of supporting our teachers to do the very best by their students. Something I firmly believe every teacher wakes up in the morning ready to and hoping to do. It's a tough job, and supporting them is an honor for us, as it is to support our kids and families in learning. So I want to start by saying thank you for the work that this committee has already done around the science of reading. I think you've spent some time hearing about the reading crisis. You've learned some about how we arrived at a place where Vermont scores are, for a while, were stuck and are now starting to slide in terms of performance on reading. I do believe there's a reading crisis, and I believe it is a solvable crisis, and that if we pull together, it is one of the best things we can do for the youngsters of Vermont to make sure that their reading is leading the nation and not in the mediocre middle. And so I start from the premise that all of us want that goal, and have some thoughts for you about how we might accelerate the pace of getting there. So my second appreciation to the committee is around specifically the complexity of what you are coping with at the moment. I know that you are in the thick of very challenging work on maps and funding and governance and all kinds of complex issues. And so on this Friday afternoon, I'm hoping to actually keep it a little simpler than that. I'm hoping to give you some clarity around a very specific lane of educational improvement, and that is really around teacher coaching, specific to reading.
So maybe you're going to do this, but can you talk about, you've recognized this slide, stuck and then a slide. Can you talk about that? What you think is going on, the setup that you're remedying?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. For a long time now, we have been trying to figure out what works with the majority of students when it comes to reading instruction. We have, in the roughest of numbers, about a third of our kids are going to learn to read pretty effortlessly. Almost any teaching method is going to still result in kids gaining the skills that they need, figuring it out. I was lucky I was one of those kids, so I know what that felt like. It's great feeling reading like this. About another third are going to really struggle and are going to need some kind of specific instruction that is in the early grades phonics based, that really, really helps them map the brain pathways between the sounds of letters and the words on a page. So figure those two are the two extremes. And then in the middle, we've got about another third that really benefit from the specific instruction, but can pick it up a little more quickly. Yes,
Can I ask you, of course, do we step away from phonics for a while and realized that it actually is very important, so we lean back for phonics?
that is a piece of the puzzle. Yes. For approximately 20 years, give or take, curricula were much more focused on the joy of reading, the exposure to print, and those things are incredibly important. But without a solid foundation in decoding through phonics, you don't get to the joy of reading because you're not reading. So yes, phonics plays a critical role.
Yeah.
It's very necessary, but not the total picture. Other initial comments or questions? Yes, sir.
Colin, is that part of proficiency baseline?
Is reading or phonics part?
Going away from the product.
That's a good question. I think that they were correlated in time, but I don't know of any direct relationship between the two. Yeah.
So there was a time not too long ago when by the way, I'm well aware the test scores don't, I won't shot tell that story, but
Of course.
where our test scores were in a good place and we were doing well with reading and math, about year for reading or literacy, but then they started to slide. I'm really interested in what precipitated that slide.
Mm.
And by the way, I just want to state for the record, and perhaps at least for my part, when we ask these questions, I'm with you. I know that every teacher gets up offended, and I don't want this to ever come across as, because that's not the point. The point is systemic. What's happening systemically? That's what we need to get at. I think here. But what is that? Where'd that come from?
Experts in the research will tell you that the combination of factors that got us into this mess are exactly as you say. It's a system, right? And so take from the beginning the training of teachers through our post-secondary system. I worked in higher education for a long time. I know how slowly things change in higher education. And I know that when new research came along, this would have been, 40 years ago now, give or take, that began to show how the reading brain actually worked, what's actually happening up there in our synapses when we are learning to read. That research was extraordinarily slow to be brought into our colleges of education. And the slowness with which that learning about the reading brain actually made it into classrooms was a huge contributing factor to the decline in reading scores. We also, in education, as you know, there are movements and trends, and there was a trend toward what's known as whole language, which then became balanced literacy. These are approaches that, in the case of balanced literacy, try to combine both what we've learned from the study of phonics and other science reading practices and practices that were more popular in, let's say, the 60s and the 70s, when teachers were taking a different approach to the teaching of reading. Phonics was perceived as too drill-based. And I understand that critique, but it can be extraordinarily frustrating for a student to be encouraged to read whole words and to focus on comprehension when they can't sound out those words. And so at the Stern Center, we have a strong belief that the earlier we can get that decoding down for kids, the more likely they will be to become readers, to enjoy reading, to want to read more. Whether they're reading about science or sports or whatever they're interested in, they need that foundation. And so make no apology for believing in that science that says you do have to start with engaging students in the sounds of words and helping them make sense of the code of reading.
So you're back, you're saying phonics.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But phonics is one piece of several components in reading that reinforce each other. So yes, you've got to have that clear decoding and the ability to connect the sounds to the letters to the words to the sentences. You also want awareness of the sounds of language. We're the Stern Center for Language and Learning because the processes of understanding language, whether it's oral or written, those processes are connected. And so there's been a lot in the news lately about whether dyslexia as a learning disability holds people back. And sometimes it does. But one of the things we also know is that dyslexic learners, because they are so capable at interpreting everything else around the sounds of language, can be some of the most creative, entrepreneurial thinkers around. And so dyslexia, some people think of it as a superpower. We also see a lot of students at the Stern Center for whom it has become a huge barrier to success in school. And we go back to those phonics basics. We go back to let's get the code down, let's build the muscle of interpreting the words, so that these extraordinary minds can do what they're supposed to do in the world and not be held up by feeling like they're less than. And when you think about that being as many as up to a third of our kids, I think that also helps explain those numbers.
I'm one of them.
Yeah, I think it's become more, good for you for saying so, it's become more acceptable to acknowledge that not everybody reads at the snap of our fingers. And so what brings me here today is to underline for you the incredible power that we have when we support teachers in gaining this knowledge. They are the best and most direct route, right? The road to reading improvement leads right through their classrooms. They can make or break a reading initiative. And so I appreciate what you said, Senator, about starting with the premise of support for teachers. It's a hard job. There's a lot going on with our kids. And if we equip teachers with the kind of coaching that actually changes practice in their classroom, I believe we can turn things around for more kids more quickly. What that looks like is practitioner-led and frontline-led coaching. There's a lot out there right now about professional development for teachers that I think is capitalizing on the trend around coaching being sort of new and cool, and really maybe mislabeling sort of standard professional development where you share the content, hope people use it, and call it a day, and that doesn't work. We know that what works when you are a professional trying to learn how to change your day-to-day, practice, build a muscle. It's called coaching for a reason. When we coach in athletics, we coach the specific athlete in the specific sport. We do reps, we make sure that that muscle memory is there. Our teachers need the same thing. And I think we can really harness that drive that they have to get it right for every child if we can provide that kind of coaching as part of our reform efforts.
So that sounds like after the fact, or at least in part after the fact. Would you say that the real issue is in regard to teachers and being ready to teach is the training in the first instance?
Absolutely. I mean, of course, if we can get upstream through the training programs, we're going to be in a better spot.
And what's happening there?
I can speak a little bit to it. I have been very encouraged, to take just one example from our higher ed institutions, very encouraged by University of Vermont's increasing openness to the research on reading that the Stern Center has espoused since our founding back in '83. Under Kate Shepard's leadership as dean, we have seen a different perspective come into the curriculum. But as I said earlier, higher ed tends to change very slowly. And so really looking at the field today and beginning where we are with all of the teachers out there in classrooms, I think requires some support that is kind of a just-in-time model that says, maybe you've been teaching for 20 years and you're just starting to figure out how the science of reading actually works with your students. And we hear that regularly from teachers at the Stern Center. It's pretty incredible how many times my team hears, I can't believe I didn't know this. Can't believe I didn't get this in my training.
So how do we get what you're talking about into schools across Vermont, a lot of schools?
Yeah, it's happening. And it's happening school by school. We take the approach of when a school comes to the Stern Center and wants to work on reading, we have a pretty in-depth conversation about where are your teachers now? What does your data say? What's the level of openness and excitement about taking this on? I mean, bottom line is when a school decides collectively from the teachers on up, we're going to change reading scores. That's the dream scenario. Then we can tap into that and give them all the tools and motivation they may need. It's trickier when it's a top-down mandate. It just is. It's, as I said, it's frontline led change at its best.
And so you go into schools?
We do. We do.
I know Dan.
We do. And we work with customized contracts for professional development for teacher cohorts. So, for example, we've done quite a bit of work in Addison Northwest and worked with superintendent, principal, and teacher leaders there to focus in on the early grades in elementary to really get that foundation strengthened. And been doing that work for approximately 4 years now through one of the teacher training areas in the Stern Center.
So we call you in, school calls you in,
Yes.
usually the early ed, obviously. What's the timeline? What's the timeline? How long are you gonna be there? How long does this go? When-
Depends on where they start, of course, but usually we look for at least half a school year of commitment. That's kind of the baseline. Can't do much in less time than that. With everything else that's bearing down on educators and school leaders. But with regular, weekly, bi-weekly coaching, we do start to see instructional change
Is that
pretty quickly.
after class, sometimes during class? How's that work?
This is where the customization is really important. It depends on the school.
Okay.
Right. So some schools will say to us, we want to fit this school day. Our biggest challenge is getting subs in order to make that happen. Others will say we got a designated time every Tuesday after school, right? So it depends.
Okay, so it's pulling the teachers into setting like this, sit down training. You don't do it in front of the students. It's more one on how many teachers that you're gonna be dealing with.
We've seen good success with what we call the small group coaching model. So usually that's 3 to 5 teachers who have a similar, who are coming at it from a similar perspective. So it might be 3 kindergarten teachers are coming together to talk specifically about what are we teaching right now? How might it change based on what we're learning about the science of reading? What does our data in the first grade say? If our data in the first grade says, actually, we're doing okay in kindergarten, it's really in second grade that things are starting to fall apart for our kids, then we might target there. And so that customization is really important because I think there's a lot of trust in the coaching relationship, right? You're asking folks who are comfortable with a particular way of approaching that material to look at doing something a little different, to see a different result. And so in asking that, we gotta build trust first.
And
Gotta know where they're coming in.
the big question,
Yes.
how much does it cost?
Well, it depends on the contract.
Yeah,
But-
I'll give us I want you to come in and do 4 teachers for 6 months. Just a rough idea, and they're not gonna hold you to anything, but
Sure.
to know roughly what, as a school or municipality wants to, or state says, hey, this is very important, we want to start implementing.
Yes.
What's it gonna cost us?
Well, I'll give you an idea of how it priced out in our largest initiative most recently. So back in the fall of 2024, the Agency of Education selected the Stern Center to deliver the first portion, what turned out to be the first portion of the Read Vermont initiative. And we put together a proposal that was during the 15 months, I believe it was, of that contract. That was a series of workshops, a model, developing a model for helping with assessment of outcomes, and a very strong piece that was coaching. And that was about I think it was about a $900,000 contract over the entire 15 months to cover up to 130 educators. And in that model, all 130 would receive the small group coaching that I'm speaking of. And so that gives you a sense, just a rough sense of the scale.
What was that amount again?
It was, so the total contract was about 900,000. The coaching portion, I want to say, was in the 600K range. And that was for, about a school year and a half.
And do we start seeing our reading levels increase?
Well, we engaged in that contract from October of 24 through the end of March of 25, at which point we received notice from the federal DOE and Secretary Linda McMahon that the funds were pulled back, right? So that was the now all pause letter. We did not, our timeline and the agencies were different for getting off the blocks with the coaching. So we began actually in the fall with our workshop series. And it wasn't until February of 25 that we got into the coaching component with teachers. So we were about 6 weeks into that when the world stopped with that funding.
The reception though or not was pretty good from the teachers.
Yes, schools were excited. It was largely an opt-in model, so there was interest from the field. We saw good commitment to the coaching and good engagement with it for the short time we were able to do it. And we used a combination of virtual learning and visits on site. So
To a number of schools and us, 130 each was, we went to a number.
a number of schools,
Yeah.
exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Senator,
So I think about, 3 years ago, we had, a bill in this committee enhancing reading literacy. I think it was Senator Bulick's. Did that pass?
Yeah.
And we talked about, modules that were going to be available at AOE. Did you contract with AOE?
We were not the contractor for those first set of modules.
Okay.
Yeah.
So could you provide that?
Yes, we do work like that.
Good.
Yes. And that was designed to be a self-paced learning process.
Right.
And while that has some real value in helping everybody get to baseline understanding, it is not, in my view, as effective a way to actually change what happens when the classroom door is closed as it is to build a educator coaching model. Makes sense.
So yeah, Dr. Quinn, it's good testimony. Got two questions. First, going back to Senator Williams' point, can you characterize your relationship with AOE as literacy experts? They have literacy experts. You're a literacy expert. That come from a community of others. What's the relationship? Is there a friction between you guys and AOE, or how would you characterize it?
Traditionally, the relationship between the Stern Center and the agency has honestly been pretty minimal. And so the contract that we
So
secured,
or a good thing?
I don't know. I guess I'm sort of agnostic on it. I think when the state got to the point of like so many states did in the last few years, of kind of facing these reading scores and trying to figure out how to tackle them together, I was personally, I've been at the Stern Center leading it for 5 years. So my tenure's not nearly as long as my predecessors. I followed a founder. But I know that there was talk over those decades of really wanting to be part of that conversation about systemic level initiatives at the state. But as you know, we have such a strong tradition of local control that I think for the Stern Center, the most effective way to do this work has really been to partner directly with schools, and that frontline led work has proven to be the most effective in our experience. With that said, we had a good working relationship with the agency during the time of this contract. We were excited to help our state in this way. And we had the same goals around science of reading-based practices. And there were a bunch of factors that undermined our ability to do that work in a sustained way. And that was disappointing for sure. But the work continues with our schools.
Second question. I have a frustration with this building in that everybody that comes in is right. Okay. So my question is, how do we know where the right path is? And my real question is, are there currently, because I do believe every teacher, every profession comes into work thinking they're coming to do the right thing for the good of the whatever, group or what have you, company. Are there different camps now on literacy approaches that conflict with where the Stern Center is?
Sure.
And how do we as non-professionals in the literacy world or what have you, how do we adjudicate on who's got the right concept?
Short answer, yes, there remain different camps. I would describe us as in the middle of a pretty strong pendulum swing toward science and reading based practices. But what happens in a trend swing like that, of course, is that people sort of figure out what the right thing to say is at this time, and so they talk in those terms. And my contention is that if you really want to change practice, you've got to get in there behind the classroom door, win the trust of teachers, and put these practices into play every day in classrooms, because otherwise we'll be making ourselves feel better that we are now embracing the science of reading. But will we actually be doing it with every kid? That's my concern. And I think that educator coaching of the sort that I've described to you today is the secret sauce to making that change happen. It's not easy, don't get me wrong, but without it, you can't see the kind of changes that you all have been reaching for.
And then just as a follow-up, I guess. So Senator Williams alluded to a bill that came through a couple of years ago on literacy. I think last year we had a bill on it's kind of evaluating, testing, more of a testing to make sure that, early, like grade 1, 2, 3, something in that order, that we're catching the kids. So if they need any assistance, as you were referring to at the start of your briefing, we catch them early.
Right.
Were those good approaches?
Yes.
Did we miss something? Do they need to be, massaged?
Those were indeed good approaches. And they, to me, represent the beginning of a science reading initiative here in Vermont, like the one that has been so successful over now 20 years in Mississippi, where they've really changed the data. And over again, in both the popular press accounts of that transformation in Mississippi and in the research literature on what they did and how they did it, educator coaching comes up again and again. Trust-based support for teachers, getting in the trenches with them, helping them make choices about what the reading lesson looks like, is consistently cited as one of the most critical levers to that change. And so that's what brings me here today, is to really say, you're dealing with a lot. There's an enormous amount swirling, and in everything, if you ask what is going to move those outcomes, I just say, don't forget coaching for our teachers and recognizing that the gaps in their knowledge are part of how we got here. And we work with a lot of great teachers who say, yeah, I do have some gaps in this knowledge. I want to work on them. How do I get there? So that's, to me, that's great role modeling for all students, to have a teacher who says, I'm still learning.
So under the OC's concept or CISA's, now that what you provide is be like another tool in the toolkit for cooperative education services.
That's right. And we worked in New York State with some of their VOCES model. The Stern Center's in more than 35 states in a typical year. And so we see lots of different models of teacher professional learning, depending on the state structure.
So you get hired by the SU level.
Typically, yes. Yes.
And so you work with teachers.
In our work at the Stern Center, we work direct to students. We do. In fact, I made you a little one-pager, which you have in the materials, that just summarizes, my focus today is on professional learning for teachers, which is a very big part of what we do. But I didn't want to leave out the work that we've done now for generations with individual kids and their families.
So it's interesting. I sense we have a recognition that we need to do intervention with children. And you're talking about actually intervention with teachers.
Yeah.
Well, so it's on both levels.
Yeah.
It's still in a not too critical to say this, but you haven't quite helped us get our finger on if we were doing well 15 years ago, why are we not now?
Mhm.
I think you touched on it, I think, when you talked about, so teachers are being trained in oral language.
Correct.
Okay, that's really your answer. Is that correct?
That's primary driver. Yeah,
Okay.
that's primary driver for sure.
And as a result of that, kids were able to kind of sound out words. And then got frustrated, couldn't read.
Yeah.
We lost them. Yeah.
We've lost some real ground. And I would say that, good intentions, right? Let's take a little of the old way and a little of this new way and mix them together. That's sort of how we got balanced literacy. And honestly, that's more of a jumble. It confuses more teachers and more children than it actually helps. And so making the embrace of a large aligned way of teaching, making that really thorough, I think has to be a part of the conversation on reading improvement.
Now, is that your personal thought or that is the professional thought that it's a jumble? And
It's both.
okay,
It's both.
Okay.
You'll see a lot in the education literature that talks about how balanced literacy was a kind of attempt to strike a compromise between these two trends in the field, these two, it's called the reading wars, regrettably. But I don't want to fight a war. I just want to help some kids.
amen.
So
Are you, so I sometimes wonder, but I'm a little slow to draw on, but, you're kind of offering service. Do you have a specific ask?
I don't have a specific ask today, other than that, as you navigate all of the complexity that's being thrown at you as the education committee,
Here's one more.
here's one more.
You're-
I'm here with one more, but I am here to implore you to keep those outcomes front and center in every decision. There are so many that are about that big picture of, the maps and the funds and always behind every one of those decisions, right? There's a group of kids in a classroom and there's a teacher trying to do right. So the Stern Center is really committed to helping in that work in any way that we can. And we are espousing teacher coaching as essential in that. So to the extent I have an ask, please don't forget those outcomes in that teacher coaching are going to help the kids in our state with many things we do. Yeah.
So I see a hand up from Senator.
Hi, shoot. I'm on two different screens, so hold on. Okay, I shouldn't be echoing anymore. I had my computer going in one room and I was on my phone in another room. So I just wanted to start with a comment. Lori actually really helped me just over lunch, having a 1-year-old boy and a 3-year-old girl. I was able to say somewhat intimately, just over a conversation about how coaching works, that I feel like it was easier to help my daughter with literacy. She thinks a lot like me. She has a long attention span. She can sit and read a book. My 18-month-old son can't do that. I felt like, oh God, I'm not reading to him as much because he won't sit with me and read a book. And Lori gave me some tips about, using tactile engagement and the sound that things make, and like having a hands-on approach to literacy. That was not true for me as a kid in an Indian household either, with like sitting and learning cursive and having to sit still for a long time. And so, just having that tool as a parent too was really valuable. And I think sometimes when you're coaching teachers, they're also able to coach parents too, right? Like I've had a lot of conversations in the early childhood spaces where we're having our kids or thinking about having our kids about the latest thoughts around literacy and different ways of learning. And it's, I can already see a difference in a couple weeks with my son. Um, so I guess that's just to say, I think people hit on some things that, Lori, I just want you to know I didn't plant anybody. The Agency of Education is asking us to invest more in Read Vermont. And I thought it was really important that people hear from a really successful organization that was working with the agency early on. But when we have AOE back in, I'd love to talk to them about who have they hired now to continue with Read Vermont. Is it all in-house? Have they hired an outside of state consultant? And really, I didn't feel qualified to ask them how their program is doing until I talked to somebody like Lori. So, I'm newer to the committee, and it just felt really important to understand the science of literacy and know that it's a mix of things because kids are all really, really different.
Thank you for that. I'm happy to hear that your son is playing with language sounds. And when if you came to some of the classrooms where we're working, you would see students clapping out the syllables of words. It's a great way for little ones to learn. That multisensory approach where little kids want to play and we want them to play. That's how they learn and understand the world. They can play with language sounds. We've done some really fun programs with Head Start. Capstone Head Start did a partnership with us recently, and watching those littlest kids discover language is fantastic. Not only because it's fun to watch them discover language, but because you're building the foundation that when you first put a book in front of that little kid in kindergarten, they're actually going to be reading ready. They're going to know how language works because they'll play with it and made sense of it that way.
So since we have you here, Unway, are you doing any work with the agency at this point?
At this moment, no.
Okay. Just with the school districts.
That's right, and a little bit with direct with schools is the work right now, and a little bit with libraries as well. Did a presentation for the state library to help introduce Science of Reading Aligned, Story Hour, that sort of thing, and make sure that families that were using their community libraries also had awareness of these kind of core concepts of the science of reading. That's been helpful.
So you're working with pre-K teachers as well?
Yes.
That's a lot.
In that project with Capstone Head Start, we have now done 2 years and are in the works for a third. We just received some private funding to help us get the 3rd year done.
So how many people are at the agency?
My team is just under 80 people, give or take. Many part-time, about 40 of us are full-time.
Are you all in Vermont?
No. After the pandemic, our organization really became a hybrid workforce. And while we have a building in Williston where we see kids and do a little bit of training, the vast majority of what we do is either virtual or out in the field when it comes to teaching.
Do you work only in Vermont?
No. So last complete year, we worked with 155 Vermont schools, about 1,100 Vermont teachers out of the 2,200 or so teachers that we worked with as so still by far our deepest roots here in Vermont, but some breadth out there with other states and a few other countries too.
Okay, just to ask a question that's kind of asked before, but if you could wave a wand and tell us what we should be doing as a committee, what would you say? What would you say if you wave the wand?
I think that if you are putting funding toward educator coaching in particular, I hope that that what I've shared with you today about the critical nature of meeting teachers where they are and ensuring that whatever model you use, they are driving the change, right? That You can require that the professional development happen, but the specifics of how it happens, I believe needs to be in the hands of teachers in order for it to stick.
Buy-in.
That's it. You can change the world with buy-in.
Anybody? Thank you. This was helpful.
Great,
Yeah.
my pleasure. Thanks for the time.
Thank you.
Your time. And happy to help in any way ongoing.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Lori.
Thank
For
you.
coming in. So we're trying to get John over here. Okay, so we.
Yeah, you should be available.
Okay. Into. Next. The other agenda, which is the yield.
Michelle, great week. You take care.
Any background on the proposal, any background on the yield, what the vote was, or?
No.
No,
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. So our section, so we're just so that people, our section of the gift village, as I understand it, it was in a section, it was section 5. We all have it.
5. Census grant.
Yeah, which is a big section of the village, but
Was this for special education?
yeah, the census grant is special ed. And I think they're just making and going that setting how the grant gets set different. It's not like what's the base amount that time to be, but so I read it.
I believe John is writing rights.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay, so it's fine. Okay.
Oh, I think he's scared. You know, need a room already, and Susan.
What?
With your reading, let's see.
Oh, okay, Susan. Yeah. Okay. I saw that. Thank you.
John's on screen.
Yes. Good afternoon, John.
Hello. How's it going?
We're fine. Or at least I think we all are.
Yeah, sorry I'm not there. I'm feeling a little unwell.
Yeah.
So
Well, Senator Ron Finsdale is home as well, for the same reason. I
Yeah.
think.
Crying child in the background. Yep.
I'm not envious. It sounds tough.
So we don't normally get the yield bill, but we did this year, I think, because of section 5, as I understand it. But since we have you, probably doesn't work for us to gain a little bit of understanding of the first several sections and then really focus early on section 5.
Sure.
And we're
Yeah.
gonna do this in reverse because we have Representative Kornheiser coming after you to introduce it.
Okay.
So since you're first, just give us a little, take us in this whatever you want to, but we all have hard copies of the bill incidentally.
For sure. So I will screen share just so we're all looking at the same thing, but feel free to.
Actually, Senator Hinsdale does not have a hard
Yep.
copy.
Perfect.
Yeah, I
So-
love good screen share.
Okay. So John Gray, Office of Legislative Counsel, I'm going to pull up H 949, which is the yield bill. I will call out that sometimes the yield bill is of varying length, right? Sometimes it just sets out the yields, which are a required yearly bill setting the yields to establish the property tax rates. But in certain other years, various other mechanisms are included. Sometimes it's used as a larger vehicle for education, finance-related matters. In this case, it's the yields setting plus a couple of technical provisions, including the section 5 that you had called out. So I'm just going to walk through section by section, if that is okay.
That's good.
So section 1 is setting the yields themselves. And I will just note that it and section 2 can be thought of as linked together because the yields and non-homestead rate that you're going to see here are reflective of reserving a particular amount of general fund money, which is addressed in section 2. So section 1 itself sets the property dollar equivalent yield, the income dollar equivalent yield, and the non-homestead property tax rate. I think that Julia is likely to be there shortly and can speak to the actual figures themselves. But just as high-level background on what this does, the House Ways and Means Committee was debating different options for buying down taxes or not, and over different timeframes. The figures that you see reflected in the yields and non-homestead rate here reflect applying half of a total $104.9 million general fund transfer, half of that money to the FY27 taxes. And so that's what's reflected in the yields here. And the other half is reserved in section 2. So that's high level what's happening in sections 1 and 2. And these are the yields that are then used to determine folks' homestead property tax rates and their property tax credits. So what you see here, property dollar equivalent yield of 9,170, income yield of 12,576, and a non-homestead rate of 1.698. Section 2 is the reserve that I spoke to. So it takes half of that 104.9 million. And it says that in fiscal year 2027, 52,450,000 shall be reserved in the ed fund to offset education property tax rate increases in FY28. So that's the subsequent year's setting of the yields. And before I jump to the next sentence, you'll recall that each year we receive the December 1 letter from the commissioner. And that December 1 letter is reflective of estimates of budgets that are coming in. Obviously, it's relatively early, but it's also reflective of a number of assumptions that the commissioner makes when determining the yield recommendation. And so what this second sentence is saying is that when the commissioner does the December 1 letter, this upcoming December, they need to account for that reserved 52.45 million, which would be applied to FY28 taxes. So on lines 18 through 21, the Commissioner of Taxes shall assume that the 52.45 million reserved under the section is unreserved and unallocated and applies to the calculation of the FY28 yields and non-homestead rate when making the recommendation required pursuant to the Title 32 statute that describes the December 1 letter. The reserve created under this section shall be considered an authorized use of ed fund monies pursuant to the ed fund statute 16 VSA 4025. So sections 1 and 2 are your classic yield pieces. In some years, you don't have a section 2. You only need the section 2 if you're actually creating a reserve, right? So that's what's happening here is you have yields, non-homestead rate reflective of using half of that 104.9 million and then reserving the remainder for following year property taxes.
Yes.
Is it okay if I go to section 3 or are there questions? I can't necessarily see very well.
So I think we're good for section 3.
Okay. So section 3 is truly a technical fix. This is related to the application of the statewide adjustment, which just for context, you'll recall that the statewide adjustment is something that was developed in recent years. And in part, it was trying to address the issue that when folks receive the presentation of their property tax bills, they see a rate pre-CLA, and then they see a post CLA rate, and they end up attributing a lot of the blame for the changes or increases in their rate to the CLA. To avoid that kind of discrepancy, the statewide adjustment is meant to be a mathematically neutral tool. It is not intended to change anyone's taxes, but it affects the presentation of your tax bill, basically. And the consequence is that it produces a pre-CLA rate, because the statewide adjustment is built into the yield, that is closer to the post CLA rate. And so there's less variation in a taxpayer's tax bill that is attributable to the CLA. It's really truly intended for presentation purposes. And if it starts to have a mathematically substantial effect, you know that there's an issue. And so that's what led to this. This is an amendment to 32 VSA 6061, which is from your chapter that is covering the property tax credit. And I don't know if it's interesting to describe the math at all behind this, but basically in introducing the statewide adjustment throughout the statutes, pieces were handled that addressed netting out the statewide adjustment application as applied to the yield and the property side of the equation, but they did not apply to the income side of the equation. And the consequence was that the property tax credits are inaccurate. They're not reflecting the right relationship between the property yield and the income yield. And so what these measures do high level is they basically insulate, they wall off the property tax credit chapter from anything related to the statewide adjustment. And the way that they do that is by basically creating a definition of the statewide education tax rate for the property tax credit chapter that returns you to the pre-statewide adjustment yield. Again, this is not a change in anyone's taxes. This is addressing a technical problem that resulted from the introduction of the statewide adjustment, which is intended to be mathematically neutral. Perfect.
Yes.
Section 4, you may have seen measures like this before in sort of miscellaneous tax bills and the like. And in fact, there was an extremely similar measure last year for the city of Barre. This is an ed fund refund to the city of Barre TIF district because they overpaid from their TIF increment in FYs 21 through 24. The genesis of this is that there was an error in the software that the city uses, and it overcalculated the increment that needed to be sent to the ed fund. And so this is compensating the city for that overpayment. And what you see is that it notwithstands the ed fund statute to ensure that you don't trigger the poison pill. And it appropriates about $150K from the ed fund to the Department of Taxes in FY27 to pay to the city of Barre to compensate them for overpayments of that ed property tax in FYs 21 through 24. The measure that you may be familiar with, if you recall this at all, is that we had the exact same section in last year or the preceding year's bill, but it addressed the overpayment from fiscal years 2016 through 2020. So this was an ongoing software issue. And the testimony that I have heard, although I was not part of it, is that that software issue has been fixed and that you should not expect to continue to receive these requests from the city of Barre.
Hey, John, I got a question.
Yes.
Software, is that something generated by the state for the TIF, or is that something that is commercially purchased?
Hold on just a second. I do not. I don't think it is state software. I think it is through the New England Municipal Resource Center. So I don't think it is through the state, but there might be others who know better. But I don't think that is state software. I think it's through the New England Municipal Resource Center. But I would double check that. That's just a quick Google pulling up.
Okay, so this TIF is not unique to Vermont. It's something that's common nationwide, or?
Oh, TIFs are used all throughout the country. Yes.
So Vermont doesn't recommend a particular software for TIFs for Vermont municipalities?
I don't know of any specific one, but again, that would be a little bit outside of my wheelhouse. It might be helpful to talk to VEPC or maybe even the city of Barre just to hear about their experiences with this software and if they were recommended the software or if it's sort of a standard. I'm guessing that it's a standard one folks use, but I just don't know.
Thank you.
On to section 5.
Yes, so section 5, as you were discussing, I think this is the reason that it landed here. Again, this is another technical fix, but it's going to look a lot more substantive than that. This is touching your special education chapter of Title 16, and it's dealing with the census block grant. And the problem that it is trying to solve, before I jump into the text itself, is that years ago, the census grant amount was set, I want to say back in, I mean, it's set many times, but I want to say back in 2019, legislation was passed. And it basically anticipated districts were receiving different special education amounts, and it was forecasting into the future what the uniform base amount, so the per pupil amount for determining these grants would be. And it was on the basis of prior year appropriations plus inflation, plus a number of things. And so it was forecasting into the future what the uniform base amount should be for grants. At that point, school districts were paying different amounts in these census grants. And so at the time when this was done, and I think it was just an oversight in the drafting, they did not build in inflation from FY27 forward. It had inflation for FYs 19 through 26, but nothing going forward. And so before I jump to the text, just to frame what's happening, you're going to see a ton of struck text because this is a section that spells out transitional measures. It's going to make more sense once you see the text. But all that's happening here is the House codified what the AOE forecasted figure should be for FY27, and then it built in an inflator moving forward to ensure that your census grants are reflective of increasing cost as measured in that inflator. So again, this is a technical correction to an oversight to not have an inflator in the census grant. The first piece is here. This is just stylistic updates from our drafting operations staff, so no change here. I can, this is giving you student counts for supervisory unions. This is the high level way to think of the concepts embraced here. And the real piece that we're talking about, the change that's happening, is here on page 4. And it's changing the definition of uniform base amount, which again is basically what you can think of as the per pupil amount that's going to be multiplied by an SU's average daily membership to produce their overall census grant. And so if you look at the struck language, like if you think about what existing law is, which is what is reflected in the struck language, you can see all of these transitionary measures, right? It's an amount determined by dividing the average appropriation over a given number of years, increasing by an annual inflation change in certain specific fiscal years, and then giving you a different inflator in the following years. It's quite messy to read. I will say that this is something where, had I relied exclusively on the logic of the text, I would not have arrived at the correct figure. But this was a happy instance of a bill section where Ledge Council, Joint Fiscal Office, and the Agency of Education got together and came to see what the proper number is. So I would say this was a good example of all staff kind of getting together to figure out what the appropriate number is. And so the language that's struck is related to these transitionary measures. Obviously, you don't need to call out anymore what the appropriate number would be in these fiscal years because we're now past them. And it's just codifying outright the $2,350 figure, which is the per pupil. That's your uniform base amount for FY27, i.e. the upcoming budget year. The piece that I do want to call out as sort of a policy choice here and explain a little bit background on is the choice of inflator. You can apply all kinds of different inflators, right? And you may recall that there were discussions related to inflators in Act 73. Typically, we see in the Title 16 context for education using annual changes in NIPA. What is proposed here as an attempt to reduce volatility is a 3-year rolling average annual change in NIPA. And so that's what you see on lines 16 and onward. The uniform base amount shall be adjusted for inflation each fiscal year beginning in FY28, because you already have your FY27 figure. So beginning in FY28, that amount is adjusted by taking the preceding year's uniform base amount. So it's accumulating over time by the most recent 3-year average annual percentage change in NIPA. And it uses the standard published index that we use in this context, the implicit price deflator for state and local government consumption expenditures and gross investment, and then round upward to the nearest whole dollar amount. So that's really what the bill is doing. It's just adding an inflator, but it looks much more complicated. If you want to look at the context of the statute itself, you can see that this is the state committing to satisfying its special education maintenance and fiscal support requirements. And it's saying each supervisory union shall receive that census grant each fiscal year to support the provision of these services to students on an individualized education program, use that funding and other available sources to provide special ed services to students in accordance with these IEPs as mandated under federal law. They may use these to support the delivery of comprehensive system of educational services, but shall not use them in a manner that abrogates the SU's responsibility to provide special ed services to students in accordance with their IEPs as mandated under federal law. I frankly can't speak at all to the education policy, but this is the context of the census grant. My role in this was really correcting the inflator and again, striking all of the transitionary language. We don't need to speak to what happens in FY23 anymore. Just like this call out here is reflecting what was envisioned at the time of enactment, that from FY27 onward, you would have this very clean statute. And that's what you will have if you imagine getting rid of all the struck text. You'll have a much simpler statute that just says in the subsection C, the amount of the census grant for a supervisory union shall be that uniform base amount, $2,350 as adjusted for inflation. It's multiplied by the supervisory union's long-term membership. And again, striking more transitionary measures here. Lastly, the effective date is July 1, 2026, but I'm happy to scroll back up to section 5 if you had questions on this.
Senator Rashid.
Thanks, John. I guess this goes section 5, does this in any way address the concerns that we've heard about the maintenance of efforts issue and the gap in funding that a number of schools or a number of districts will see as a result of the foundation formula?
I don't fully know the answer to that, but my answer would be I would assume not, because this is really intended as a technical fix to a lack of an inflator. And I'm just guessing that those conversations are not about the absence of an inflator, but I'm sure that there might be others who could speak to that.
Yeah, thank you.
So this doesn't really incentivize any control.
Yeah, this reflects existing practice for census grants and truly just ensures that you don't have a stagnant number beginning in FY27. That's all. Because up to this point, you've had an inflator built in. So each year that census grant amount is growing, and every supervisory union is being brought to the uniform base amount. And now that you've arrived at the uniform base amount, just to ensure that it's not stagnant and keeps pace with inflation, however you might measure that, that's really all that this addresses. Is it doesn't change anything about current practice. It just changes the dollar figure that flows with the census grant to ensure that it tries to keep pace with inflation.
And it's automatic instead of being reviewed annually.
Yes, and you can think of that as consistent with the way that it was done before, right? If we scroll through the section, for instance, you can see all of the inflation measures that were built in for each of these pieces. Now, it's true that someone has to actually go in and look and calculate the percentage difference, the relative change in the index. So you check it on a given date, and you check it on another date, and you compare the difference between those two dates to basically determine a percentage change in the index. And then you reflect that growth, assuming that it is growth, in the change in the census grant. So there is a human element involved, but this is continuing essentially a practice that was already built into statute, but for whatever reason, didn't contemplate inflating moving from FY27 forward.
So we don't have any idea how much this is gonna cost and street light.
I think that Julia may have information on this, and I expect that what you will hear, not to steal her thunder, is that this is consistent with what the AOE was forecasting for these costs this year. But I will stop speaking for her and let that come out on its own.
Thank you, Julia's thunder.
John, thank you. If you could stay on, it might be a good idea, just to.
For sure. Yeah.
Julia is in the room. And is ready to come up and take the seat.
We hope you feel, yeah.
Thank you.
Hi. Got my feet to press the floor. Good afternoon, Julie Richter, joint office, joining the Zoom now. I did send Daphne a couple of links, or a couple of documents right before coming down here. So do you want me to go ahead and share them, or do you want me to just talk through them? What makes most sense? Or do you want me to just answer questions?
Well, the only reason to share them is because the Iran program still doesn't have, actually,
Okay.
none of us have those documents. Yeah, go ahead, Cheryl.
Okay, so there's two documents. One is the fiscal note for the yield bill. The other is the education fund outlook. I'll go ahead and share the fiscal note. And before I do that, I will just say sort of the two differences are that the fiscal note is walking through section by section, the estimated fiscal impact of each section. The education fund outlook, I don't know if I presented it here this year, but I know I have in the past in this committee. It's essentially a snapshot, kind of like an operating statement, but not technically an operating statement of the education fund. So it lays out the revenues, the appropriations, the reserves, et cetera. And it's what Finance and Ways and Means Committee use as they are examining, pulling all the different levers in the education fund, what's going to happen. So going ahead and sharing my screen. Right. Okay, so this is the yield bill that John just walked through. I don't think you need the bill summary because he just did a great job. Fiscal impact, this is really the big picture of the fiscal impact of each section of the bill, right? So there's 5 sections of the bill. The first 2 relate to the we can just walk through them one at a time. So section 1, this is setting the yields and the non-homestead rate for fiscal year 2027. You'll recall this needs to be done annually in section law, because if it's not done, it automatically defaults to something else in statute that would result in much larger tax increases than if you pass that would raise more property tax revenue than is actually needed in FY27. So the yields and rate are estimated to result in an approximate 7% increase across homestead, non-homestead, and income sensitized property taxpayers in FY27. I do really want to emphasize that that is an average. You'll recall homestead property taxes vary across the state by community based off of income level, property level, local spending decisions. And so, dependent on both growth and property value, local spending decisions, CLA, you'll really see a variance, both below and above that 7%.
We're getting copies of this.
I think we have posted. But by the way, I was initially intending this to be today just to be a bill introduction, and Julia volunteered to come over and be here, and so that's why we don't have copies, because this was the last minute addition. We should yeah.
You can also, fun fact, find it on JFO's. All of our fiscal notes are available on JFO's website in the top right corner. If you click bill number, you can type in the bill number and see if we published a fiscal note. And it's also available on the bill page. If you click fiscal information, everyone knows that. But you'll have hard copies soon. Sounds like. So that's what section 1 does. And these rates and yields have been set at the level estimated to be sufficient to fully fund the education fund in FY27 based off of the school budget data that we have available and forecasted non-property revenues, and a few other outstanding policy decisions currently being contemplated by the General Assembly.
And the real issue between 1 and 2 is whether everything was in this year, it was just a rate to 4% or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So
Reserve had.
yeah, so that leads into section 2, and it also really speaks to it's an iterative process by the Finance and Ways and Means Committee, because if you make sure the ed fund is fully funded, they need to contemplate all of the policies that are impacting the education fund. So we're working with all of the bills that touch on the ed fund to calculate the yields and rates. So this assumes that the 104.9 million from general fund, as recommended by the governor and included in the House budget, as passed, that 105 million from the general fund would be transferred to the education fund. Then the policy question arises of, well, how do we use that 105 million? Do we use the entirety in FY27 to buy down rates? Do we use it over a course of several years? Or the House went with using it over the course of 2 years. So using half in FY27 for lowering property tax rates, and then going into section 2, reserving that other half of the 104.9 million within the ed fund with the intent to use it to offset property tax rates in FY28. Section 4, John spoke about this. This is that transfer from the ed fund of about 150.6 thousand to, well, technically it's to the tax department and then to the city of Barry, but to compensate for the city's overpayment. This is estimated to have a de minimis impact on the education fund because it is, in the context of the ed fund, a small amount. And lastly, as John mentioned, section 5 is setting the census block grant uniform base amount for FY27 at $23.50, and then inflating it forward in future fiscal years. Also, as John mentioned, this is what was included in the agency's GovRec, and what was assumed by the agency and what's been communicated to the field. So there's no fiscal impact because this is what everybody was expecting. It needs to be included in statute for it to happen. The other piece I will note, and I know that John mentioned this too, is, as you likely know, there's a lot of federal requirements regarding special education and maintenance of fiscal support. So it's important to ensure that the state is meeting maintenance of fiscal support so that the federal funds can continue to flow into Vermont special ed. And this helps maintain that before the foundation formula kicks in.
And we'll have with some districts. Quit. Right.
I don't know. I think that is something that people are looking into, certainly on the House side. I know you all are talking about that as well. If you recall, part of Act 73 charged JFO with hiring a contractor to look into a number of pieces of the foundation formula, and explicit areas for them to look into. One of those pieces is a review of special education weighting. So when we do get that report with recommendations in December, it will include recommendations regarding special education weights.
So we're raising taxes again. Right. If without the one-time spending, what was the actual tax rate?
I need to pull that up. There are too many different iterations. Give me 1 second. And while I'm pulling that up, I guess I would say, yes, this is forecasting for property taxes to rise. Because, and I think I'm going to be coming in next week to talk about this in a little bit more detail. But because of the way that the education fund is structured, we sum up how much is being paid out of the ed fund, primarily school budgets, subtract non-property revenue sources, and then the remainder needs to be made up with property taxes or another source of revenue. So what we see, and I guess I'm spoiling next week's testimony, but what we see is that education fund uses are growing at a faster pace than non-property tax revenues, which means naturally something needs to fill the hole. And in this instance, in this policy decision, it would be property taxes. But yes, if there were
with the voters across the line to make that decision. And just try to figure out how to pay the bill.
Yeah, we're crossing it up. But with one-time funding. So there's gonna be winners and losers, some smaller districts versus the larger districts. We know how it's gonna affect white district.
So I guess I would say, I just pulled it up, taking a step back. If there were no general fund monies used to lower property taxes, in FY27, the average increase would be 10%. That still includes approximately 22 million of one-time education fund surplus being used. If you're not using that ed fund surplus, it climbs closer to 12%. How it would impact your district? It will impact your district dependent on your district's per pupil education spending divided by the yield, and then adjusted by the local CLA. So what we're looking at here is the education fund outlook as passed by the House. And so what we're seeing here is the average uniform bill change. We get an average. So for instance, in communities that are lower per pupil spending and have not seen significant decreases in their CLA, they'll probably fall below the average. In communities that are higher spending and or let's say lower spending compared to where they fell last year, or higher spending compared to where they fell last year. Same with CLA, that's really what's going to be impacting where they fall. And if you were to want to do the math, you see here in row D, the property yield per pupil. And that's if you think of the calculation of the equalized tax rate, homestead equalized tax rate. It's the per weighted pupil spending divided by this 9,170 denominator.
That's fine. Great. So, thanks. So I think our real focus is section 5. But it's first one. Hope that is here. Any questions, especially about section 5? Thanks.
Yeah.
Have a wonderful weekend.
So the representative.
I'm just gonna comment.
We have a friend in this committee this year, doing the walkthrough first and then somebody to introduce the bill afterwards, which is happening. So it's happening again. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, Emily Carpenter from Brattleboro, Chair of the House Ways and Means Committee and reporter of this year's yield bill. Happy to be here with you.
You could walk through with John.
Mhm.
And then.
Great, thank you. Thanks for accommodating my schedule. I was running committee, and so now I'm not, so good to be here with y'all. Thank you. So we start our work on the yield bill when the December 1st letter is issued. Usually a few members of the committee start looking at that. And then the first week of the session, we take a look at that outlook that's in front of you all and begin our work on it. We hear from Julia Richter every single week of the session, usually every Tuesday afternoon, and we look at how much is needed to be raised because of what school spending looks like. And then every other week, the Agency of Education comes into our committee and they tell us what the warned budgets are around the state. And as more and more budgets are finalized around the state, we come closer and closer to understanding what the final number is that we will need to raise in order to fund our schools for the year. We also, after the e-board meets in early January, we have a final number on what the non-property tax revenues will be to put into the education fund. And so we close that gap with property taxes. And that's the process we go through every year, usually with the exact same timeline. And then it usually comes to Senate Finance. And so it's fun to be here. I don't think I've ever sat in this chair before, so glad to be here with all of you. The decisions that we've needed to make the last few years, sort of in the tail after pandemic era school needs, is that, as Julia Richter said, spending on education spending and sort of the sum of all of the budgets around the state is growing faster than, and those local decisions that led to that is growing faster than the rate of our non-property tax revenue. And so as a Ways and Means Committee, we have a few choices. We can add new non-property tax revenue into the education fund. And we did do that a few years ago as a way of lowering property taxes for Vermonters. Or we can add one-time money into the education fund. That is something that is sometimes absolutely necessary because we want to make sure we're keeping Vermonters' property taxes as low as possible. But it creates a difficult situation because it creates a cliff for the next year, because spending is fairly, even in a very best case scenario, spending is fairly steady and likely to grow slightly every year. And so given that, and given the structure that it's local decision making, then funded by the state, we're changing that, right? But change isn't coming next year. We made the difficult decision 2 years ago, last year, this year, to use this one-time money. What the Ways and Means Committee decided after a lot of debate, and there was some point where on this outlook that you have, I think we might have had 15 columns with 15 different scenarios of how can we make sure this money is getting to the folks who most need it? How can we make sure this money is going to the districts who most need it? How can we make sure that we're doing this fairly? And also, how can we given that what we know from the state economists and our legislative economists, that the economy is likely, growth is slowing, and we're not going to have the same kind of general fund resources next year and the year after that we have this year. What do we want to do to make sure we're minimizing the cliff for property taxpayers next year? And so after a lot of debate, we decided to take that one-time general fund transfer into the education fund and spread it out over 2 years. We talked about spreading it out over 3 years, but we felt that over 3 years, it wasn't enough of an impact this year and next year. And we talked about doing it in a single year, but we're really worried about what will happen with property taxpayers next year. And so given that we are engaged in this process of education transformation, that we do have hope on the horizon for a system that, if nothing else, is a little easier to make a difference for taxpayers and ideally will make a big difference for educational opportunities as well. We decided that a 2-year timeline was the best thing that we could do. And so we split this general fund transfer between this upcoming fiscal year and the following fiscal year. And we've reserved the other part. There are 2 other tiny sections of the yield bill. One is a correction to an overpayment from the education fund that we did half of last year and we're doing half of this year. And the other part is somehow when we changed our special education finance system a number of years ago, we forgot to, we had an inflator and then it just sort of like disappeared on a date certain, so we're sticking it back in. And those were both fairly minor technical pieces that were on the end of the yield bill. So that was our thinking.
So is the assumption, but this isn't Alice said, we really only have section 5.
Okay.
That's it.
Section 5, the special education part? Okay.
But just that, so is the assumption that there will be no general fund money to add into next year?
That is what everything that I have heard from, and the committee has heard from, and our appropriations committee have heard from, our state economists, our legislative economists. I spent the summer and fall going to a lot of different conferences for revenue chairs around the country. And that's what the top people from Moody's say. It's what the top people from sort of all of your major financial houses will say, is that state revenues are leveling out across every state in the country, us included.
You say leveling out, you mean stagnant?
Growing much more slowly than they have been. It's certainly not growing as fast as the cost of fuel to heat state buildings or the cost of healthcare for collectively bargained employees.
I guess question for the chair. I realized halfway through when we first started with John that we have this in our committee. I thought we were just getting like a general overview, but so what? Why?
Section 5 triggered it coming here.
Got it. I was just curious.
I wasn't expecting it either, but John said it.
The whole building was surprised.
So, but that's why. So what anyway. And so our review really is kind of, if we stay within our policy lane, is with regard to the technical things. That Jim has referred in section 1.
And as chair of Ways and Means, I would appreciate that if you ever see a number in statute and you don't see an inflator attached to it, to please spread the word, because generally there should be one.
Questions anywhere? Okay. Good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for moving the yield bill on properly as well.
Well, actually, that would just.
Yeah, we didn't say that.
I know. Take care.
Right. Are we actually, I think if people are really comfortable with this, could fill this out. We'll have other people want more time or just given that
I think that's fine.
our section really is, yeah.
Sounds like me, we're kicking the can down the road. And we're gonna have Cliff.
Yeah,
Well,
we're working on that.
But for us, our section is section 5. To go the whole thing. One hand, but mistake from the wrong way.
Well, nobody else. We send stuff to money committees. Fiddle with it. I'm not inclined to fiddle with it, but could send a signal.
I'm not going to vote for it. So. But we can vote it out today. Well,
You don't like it because, it's kicking it down the road. correct? Well, what are our,
what happens with the one-time money?
yeah, what is our solution if we don't
I don't
do
know.
this right now? That's where I'm at. It's, yeah, I agree. We're kicking the can down the road. We're working on school, better school system. Uh,
You know, the lower spending, districts are gonna be affected.
Just to back up a little bit, we do have 220 that went through that is actually an effort to keep us from getting them to the plan, bringing down the excess the pressure that's on across the next 2 years. So there's a little bit in there, and then the foundation will be up there. I think. And so, side. Anyway, okay, yeah. There's a real policy debate to be had about whether to use all the money for this year or next year, but I'm not going to get into that. And I kind of am hoping, frankly, that when we send the education bill, it goes to the finance committee, that all the other stay early.
Can I submit that we vote on this on Tuesday? There's an opportunity to talk to others.
That's fine.
Just make sure
That's
we're
fine.
not missing an opportunity.
That's fine. Yep. Okay. So, luckily on a Friday afternoon, I was able to get here early. Managed to have be a little bit ahead of schedule. So I think we're doing first. Do I have it right? That we are doing.
well, no, that didn't sound good.
9:30.
Walk through.
9:30.
It's 9:30, which we have hard copies of.
Okay.
And Senator Ron Pinstall is, of course, posted. And this is a chronic absenteeism. Well, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
You ready? Okay. Beth St. James Office of Legislative Counsel, we're gonna walk through H 930. And act relating to addressing and preventing chronic absenteeism as passed by the House. Do you want me to share my screen?
We all have our copies.
Okay. So,
Yeah, because the whole, okay.
Section 1 of the bill amends 16 VSA chapter 25 subchapter 3, which is your compulsory attendance subchapter. So it's amending the entire subchapter. Starting with adding a definitions section. So you can see this is all underlined text, so it's all new law. So as used in this chapter, absence means a student who is for at least half the school day when school is open, not physically on school grounds, or who is not receiving or attending educational, co-curricular, or athletic services or programming elsewhere pursuant to a program or plan approved by the district if the student is enrolled in public school, or an approved independent school if the school is enrolled in an approved independent school. Chronic absenteeism is defined as a student who is absent for any reason for 10% or more of a district or approved independent school's student attendance days within one school year, regardless of whether the absences are considered excused or unexcused.
So we, and I apologize for this, we didn't ask you, but what is the bill actually doing?
Amending your attendance laws.
Is it really just for clarity?
So I can't comment on the intent behind it or whether it's for clarity. It adds definitions that I'm going through right now for what is defined as chronic absenteeism or an excused absence. None of that is in current law.
Okay.
It provides specific direction for superintendents or heads of school for what constitutes an excusable absence. There's a list. There is a process for, let's see. Then there is a model policy requirement that the agency is required to develop, and then school districts would develop policies based on that model policy related to response to chronic absenteeism. There is amendments to what happens, like how many absences trigger action on behalf of the school district. There is some amendments to the truancy process and what happens if you are found to be truant. And there's a repeal of the current law that allows the superintendent or a truant officer to stop a kiddo on the street and chase them to school. And then there is a requirement added to the suspension or expulsion statute that allows public schools or independent schools to provide alternative access to education as a may, not a shall, in the event of an expulsion or suspension. And then there is a report back to you all related to how home study program fits into this piece. The language says for updates to Vermont home study program law to improve oversight of home study programs and to ensure home study participants compliance with attendance requirements. So that is a high level summary of the bill. So I would say chronic absenteeism, but lots of changes throughout.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
Are we gonna go line by line or can I ask questions?
No, we're gonna go through. Maybe at the end of the section, if there are questions.
We'll ask that.
Okay, so again, so I'm on page 1 still, these are all new definitions. These are not in current law currently. So chronic absenteeism is defined as 10% or more of being absent for 10% or more of a school year, regardless of whether they're all approved or unexcused or a mix of both absences. An excused absence means it's approved by the superintendent or head of school. And throughout, you'll hear anytime there's an approval process, it's either the superintendent or designee or the head of school or designee. I'm not going to keep saying or designee or designee or designee. So just, it's there. And then excused absences, they would include in or out of school suspensions. Parent or guardian, that there is a definition for that to account for kiddos that reach the age of majority, kiddos that are independent or unaccompanied youth. There's a definition for truancy, and on page 2, means a student who has accumulated 20 or more unexcused absences, either within the same school year or over 175 consecutive days. So that would span potentially 2 school years. And then unexcused absence means a student absence that does not fit into one of the categories of excused absences. Let's see, attendance. So I'm on page 2, line 19, attendance by children of school age. So this is your compulsory attendance statute. So kiddos between the ages of 6 and 16 are required to attend public school and approved independent school, recognized school, an approved education program, or a home study program. Unless, and again, you can see that this is current law with some, I would say, on subdivision 1, line 4, is mentally or physically unable to attend is current law, but adding that it needs to be per medical recommendation. Drafting convention change on line 10, and is excused by the superintendent. Current law allows for or a majority of school board members. So changing that to just being excused by the superintendent or the head of school for an approved independent school as provided in this chapter, or has already enrolled in secondary school. Page line 13, page 3, section 1122. So remember, the compulsory attendance age window is between 6 and 16, but what happens if you have a kiddo that's under 6 or over 16 who's in school? This section basically states if you have a kiddo on either side of the attendance window source, so 6, under 6 or over 16, if they're enrolled in a public school or an approved independent school, then the compulsory attendance requirements apply to them. So if you are enrolled and going, then you gotta go. But if you are under 6 or over 16 and you're not enrolled, that's okay under state law because you don't have. Jumping to page 4, section 1123, line 5. School absence may be excused. So this is where the list of what a superintendent or head of school may excuse an absence for. So physical, and this list does not exist in current law. So current law was, it just said in may excuse in writing any student from attending school for a definite time, but for not more than 10 consecutive school days and only for emergencies or absence from town. So now we're saying you can excuse absences for the following reasons: physical or mental illness of the student, family emergency or death in the family, quarantine in the home, students' medical, dental, mental health, or substance use treatment appointment, family observance of religious holidays, legal activities, driving examinations, college or other secondary, post-secondary program visitation, legal or administrative proceedings related to the placement of the student by the state. I'm on page 5 now. Absences due to transitions in the student's living situation as a result of student experience of homelessness, pre-enlistment or deployment activities of the student or the student parent or legal guardian, incidents of hazing, harassment, or bullying, or other reasons are not specified with the approval of the superintendent or head of school. And then subsection B says a superintendent or head of school may also excuse a student from attendance for a pre-planned family commitment or activities of which the school has been notified in advance, and pre-approved absences shall not exceed 10 cumulative school days in each school year. So that is consistent with current law.
Yes.
Going back to section A, back on page 4, there are some bills that have come through economic development because there's labor issues in there that take these kinds of absenteeism issues, but they put time factors on, time limits, you know, for family leave or whatever. Just curious if that was ever, if as this bill was coming through the House in committee, they talked about that concept or rejected that concept for students.
So subsection A does not have a time limit tied to it. Subsection B does, is that not? So I don't see anything in it in A. I don't remember any testimony specific to that, but I was not in the room for all testimony. And I should say, if you didn't already know, this was language put forward by the agency. Yep. So obviously the House Education Committee did work on it, but this came as a pretty tight package from the agency already.
Okay, thank you.
And then, so I'm on line 5, line 16, page 5, line 16, the superintendent or head of school may request justification for an absence. So may, not a shall. Section on page 5, line 18, section 1127, response to chronic absenteeism. So this is all brand new law, and it's requiring AOE consultation with the School Boards Association, Superintendents Association, the Principals Association, the Independent Schools Association, and the Vermont School Counselor Association to develop and review at least annually a model policy on the prevention of chronic absenteeism and truancy. That model policy is required to include specific provisions for how to address the absence of a child with a disability in accordance with applicable state and federal law, and shall also include guidance that emphasizes the importance of tailored responses to all students struggling with safety and emotional issues, and shall emphasize emotional, academic, and social support to facilitate a successful reintegration for returning students. I will say that the language on lines 3, starting with which shall include through line 9 to the end of that sentence, were added through floor amendments in the House. So, and the only reason I point that out is I just said you got a Titan package from AOE, and that was not included in their Titan package. I'm on line 9. The policy shall include protocols to respond effectively to bullying and harassment, acknowledging the unique aspects of each case, including best practices for re-entry into education spaces. That was also added through a floor amendment. This policy shall include a template for documentation of actions taken according to the policy to address the absence, which shall constitute the truancy reporting protocol. And the policy shall also include a template for standard documentation to be provided to parents. And then to minimize each student's loss of educational and developmental opportunities, and to ensure equity in the treatment of absenteeism and truancy for all students and families. Each school district and each approved independent school is required to adopt a policy that is at least as stringent as the model policy developed by the agency. And then the superintendent and head of school is required to develop and implement procedures to carry out the policies. The policy is required to be consistent with the definitions in this chapter. I'm on page 7, line 4. A superintendent or head of school shall also ensure that data on student absences is collected and recorded in accordance with the Agency of Education requirements. And any school board or approved independent school that does not adopt a policy will be presumed to have adopted the most current model policy published by the agency.
So you go back momentarily to the section, page 6, line 3 through 9, said were added by floor amendments. Can you provide any insight into what it is, what this safety and emotional issue scenario was? Is this like an ICE thing? Is it like trauma from ICE?
So I would encourage you to reach out to the sponsors of those amendments if you want anything more specific than what I'm about to say, and that is just based on their floor reports. And that is the piece related to a child with a disability was a separate floor amendment, and that was specific to children who may not have a physical or a part of their disability may require them to be out of school. And how is that addressed in the model policy? The children with disabilities weren't addressed elsewhere, and so it was specifically called there. And then the students struggling with safety or emotional issues, I would say the end of line 5, starting with and which shall, through line 11, the re-entry into education spaces was specific to hazing, harassment, and bullying.
Thank you.
I see there's no, maybe it's later, but no deadline for this happening.
It's later.
Okay.
Okay, so everyone's required to adopt a policy. Page 7, line 11, section 1126, failure to attend. So if a student who's within the compulsory attendance window, so between 6 and 16, who is not exempted from school, fails to enter school at the beginning of the academic year, or being enrolled accumulates 20 or more unexcused absences within either the same school year or within the last 175 consecutive student attendance days. The principal is required to notify the superintendent that that's happening. The principal is also required to notify the student attendants if a kiddo under 6 or over 16 who is enrolled also accumulates 20 or more unexcused absences. And then the head of school shall notify the superintendent of each student's district of residence if it's an approved independent school that the student is attending. And upon review of the truancy reporting protocol that's required to be developed as part of the model policy development, the superintendent is required to notify the truant officer and centralized intake and emergency services for TPF. And then section 1127 is the notice and complaint by a truant officer. The truant officer, once they get that information from the superintendent, they have to do a little investigation into what is the cause of the non-attendance. And if the truant officer finds that the child's absences are not excused, the truant officer is required to give written notice to the parent or guardian. And AOE, as part of that model policy development, is required to provide a template for what that notice should look like. And then subsection B, if the parent or guardian continues to fail without legal excuse to cause a child to attend school as required in this chapter, after they get that written notice, then the truant officer is required to file a complaint with the state's attorney's office of the county where they are, and is required to participate with the proceedings. Subsection C tells you what those proceedings may be. So the state's attorney may prosecute a person or may file a CHIMS case. If a criminal information is filed, the person shall not be fined more than $1,000. And then there's language that talks about what information the complaint needs to include.
Talking about the parent.
Yes.
So finding the parent for the child's absence.
Yes, this is all current law.
Oh, it's all good, but it's underlined. But
Yes, because it was, what came from AOE was not this. There were some amendments made, and then through testimony, we realized that the amendments that came in the original language needed some more work. And so the Department of State Attorneys and Sheriffs and AOE got together and proposed this language to kind of clean up the statute. But under current law, it is there's an option for it to be a misdemeanor of up to $1,000 for truancy or filing a CHIMS petition. And those are the two options here.
So the $1,000 mirrors the current laws.
Yes, yes.
We didn't want to increase it for inflation or
That was not discussed.
shock value.
You did just hear someone say, and I could be money. Yeah. Okay, so on page 10, section 1128. This whole section is repealed, and this is the section that says if the superintendent or truant officer finds a kiddo within that compulsory attendance window on the street and they're not in school, they can take them to school.
So it's deleted, but is it replaced?
No.
Okay.
And the amendments to section 1129 are just updating the term person having control of such people to parent or guardian. On page 11, section 2 is an amendment. We're in the same chapter in Title 16, but a different subchapter.
Before you go on, can I just ask one question? Just curious, on top of page 10, this 1128. Oh, any idea how long that provision's been in law that police officers kind of take the kid back to school? It seems like it's probably been a while.
It's up to you.
Here we are.
Now let's see that happen nowadays. Why not?
Moving
Section-
further,
1128 was added in 1965. It was amended in 1999, and it hasn't been touched since.
Thank you.
Actually, it was amended in 1965, which means that it's been around since before 1965.
I remember it well.
1965 and then again in 1990.
'99.
Okay.
And the amendment in 1965 was just the deletion of the word "a," and so no substantive changes. And in 1999, substituted the words "ages of 6 and 16 years" or "a child of 16 years" for the ages of 7 and 16 years.
There's a big difference.
Yeah. So, let's see. It looks like, oh boy, if we want to get really really nerdy here, I'm looking at the history sources listed here, and it goes back to, this doesn't mean it's this particular statute, but it means that this particular statute was based on, you could trace it back to 1892.
And they really used to come looking for it too.
From 1892, you. Sorry, I
No, I wasn't around there.
Not that neighborhood.
Picture that.
I asked for that.
oh, good one.
Okay, so we're on section 2, page 11, line 1. Amending suspension or expulsion of students in section 1162 of Title 16. We're not touching anything in current law. All you're doing is adding a new subsection that says a public school or an approved independent school may provide access to alternative education such as tutoring, instructional materials, and assignments to a student during any period of suspension of 3 or more days, and the same for expulsion. So it's a may, not a shall. And then here, section 3 is the timeline for the policy. So on and before March 15th, 2027, AOE is required to submit a written update to you all with efforts made to develop the model policy. And it's required to include the most recent draft of the model policy and the most recent templates. And then the policy needs to be finished up on or before July 1, 2027. And school boards and governing bodies are required to adopt and implement their own policies on or before July 1, 2028. Section 4 is a repeal of section 1076, which, I always forget what this is. (1076) are also, we can trace back to the 1880s. Allows a superintendent or a truant officer to be fined not more than $100 if they fail to perform the duties imposed on them by this chapter.
That's what they used to have.
Also allows a teacher to be fined for violating a provision of this chapter, not more than $25, but not less than $5. So we're repealing that. Section 5, line 6 on page 12, home study program attendance requirements. On or before December 1st of this year, AOE is required to submit a written report to you all with recommendations for updates to Vermont's home study program law to improve oversight of home study programs and to ensure home study participants compliance with attendance requirements. And section 6 is the effective date, which is July 1, 2026.
Yes.
So maybe good news. We already made the policy that we're contemplating making in section 5. It's on page 4980 of the Senate calendar for June 17th, 2024. The miscellaneous bill. Apparently the miscellaneous bill died that year. I don't know if it was a conference committee issue or if that was Senator Campion or perhaps Representative Conlon, but the miscellaneous bill never passed. And there's a couple of pages of a policy that was worked on in section 7 of S-167 that just went into the ether on the calendar. So we already have that policy. Good Just copy and paste.
Do you mean,
Specific to section.
Yeah.
the Whole bill.
Section 5, so, yeah. Just section 5.
okay, I know there's some. Get into this, there'll be some interest from.
Yeah.
The community.
So I think this is, technical, but I think we're missing the mark because we're not trying to, there's no cause and effect analysis. Is there any bill that ties like in the mentor program or anything with some of these at-risk kids?
You have seen all of the bills,
Okay.
or you see, yeah, this is the last bill coming to you from the House so far.
Okay.
Um.
I'm talking about anything on the books as far as,
Oh, no, I mean, this is just as big as the attendance policies get. I will say, and this would be great testimony for the agency and the field to bring in, is that the bill requires AOB to develop a chronic absenteeism policy on how to address it. So I don't know what they're gonna put in that policy, right? Related to what you're asking about.
Well, we can think about,
that we've acknowledged we have a problem.
Yeah.
I just think that, I could have been a problem, but I actually had a teacher that kind of took me under his wing. He was kind of be a football coach. Marine veteran. Gave me what I needed, was a kick up the pants. And you can't do that now, but, that meant a lot to me when somebody.
I think I saw a kick in the fence there.
Yeah.
Yes,
Committee vote?
Oh, I don't remember. I can look up on their website.
yeah, we're getting the reporter and we just couldn't get them today.
Do you want me to look that up?
No.
Okay, questions for Beth in terms of the walkthrough? Okay,
Thank you, Beth.
well, she's not done yet. We have we're switching gears once again. But I have a new draft of the bill. Draft 8.1. In which you can see the discussion of the last couple of days.
Do you want to just go through the changes?
Yeah.
Therefore, not a lot.
Yeah, that's okay. We're
So the first change, we're on page 1. Subdivisions 1 and 2, this is the goal section. Subdivisions 1 and 2 were just switched. So improves government efficiency, it used to be 1, now it's enables higher quality educational delivery. And subdivision 4 used to have. It used to say preserves local voice where it demonstrably supports quality and cost effectiveness, and now it just says preserves local voice. And then I'm keeping the green highlighting to signify at the top of the key there that it is supervisory union or supervisory district boundaries that I have not been told are set in stone yet. So just highlighting that continues to be an area of the bill that we need to do some work on. And at the very least, it's an area of the bill that I need to be work on because I need to fill in school districts and alphabetize things, etc. Which does take a significant amount of time. So just so that we can factor that into whenever you want to get the bill out. So next changes. On page 15, there was a change on line 21. Just to be consistent with what we're calling, we're in the, for lack of a better way to put it, the charter change section, the supervisory union boundary change section. This said boundary adjustment request, and we had been using the term boundary adjustment proposal throughout. So I just made that was a drafting error on my part. On page 17, section 5. We updated some outdated language. This used to say that the Secretary of Education would be calling a meeting of school directors. And now we're saying calling a meeting of the school boards of the member school districts. And the same with the number of supervisory union board members. It used to say the number of directors. So we're just updating some language there. On line 19, there was internal reference that was wrong on page 20 that I've just updated. Green is again signifying just supervisory unions. Okay, so we're in section 8, the evaluation of the State Board of Education, page 22. You all had some debate or conversation, I should say, about what geographically isolated means. And I don't think I quite understood where you landed. So I am providing this as a jumping off point for you to use to hopefully land somewhere. So as used in this section, geographically isolated means a school district that is physically separated from other school districts in a supervisory union in a way that results in less opportunity for the district's resident students.
I think you got to capture it.
Great.
It's a consideration for the board. Yeah.
Then on page 25, we're in section 10, final state actions. So the agency's review and the state board's final plan. This is any mergers proposed by the agency and then the state board are required to be based on the following considerations, and you added, will the merger result in net cost savings?
So if the answer is no to any of these questions, then what happens?
It's not taken into consideration. They consider all of them, then make a kind of a decision based on these factors.
What page you?
25, line 7, the changes.
God's for instance, it might not stay well, it might still get approved. Or residents interested.
Then on page 26, section 11, this is the data that AOE is going to be, or the information AOE is going to be giving you back. There was a discussion about how to include getting information back on CTE. And again, I don't think you necessarily landed on a specific thought, so I've added it to jumpstart your conversations. So the secretary shall regularly review, evaluate, and keep the state board and general assembly apprised of the following: the discussions, studies, and activities among the districts move voluntarily towards creating new larger school districts, including how such activity will impact access to CTE. Okay. That's the last change I made, yes.
Oops, there's one on, this was, I think, you, 29, or actually, that's what you had realized that you had.
Oh, yeah.
For 60.
No longer is that 3031.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and we're working to, well, then you could do that, but we're going to get you in here.
Yep.
Well, questions about these changes?
They're all,
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, and we'll
Of course.
talk about that. Yep. We're good? Are you good? Okay, we are adjourned. You can take us off now.
have a wonderful Easter.
Thanks.
You as well.
Thing like that. Right? It's everything, so it should be.